We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Shannon Addison. And this is a really interesting topic, and I love that we're going to be talking about this. I know I use that word a lot, but we're going to be talking a lot about the bullying that goes on in schools and with our teenagers and our children, really. And Shannon's going to share her story and her experience that she's gone through with her daughter. She's not going to talk about her daughter's experience. She's going to talk about her experience dealing with this bullying that's gone on. And then what she does is she likes to help parents with, these are three big things, and I think they're fantastic. And I'm sure we'll touch on them or talk about them. What are the warning signs that parents miss? What are the signs your kids may be victims of mistreatment or the cause of mistreatment towards other children? Parents of kids with disabilities or medical conditions are not alone in their struggles. And then some of the other topics we want to touch on definitely or talk about are the challenges girls face with social media and fitting in. Yes. And helping girls develop the self-acceptance that they need. So thank you for joining us today, Shannon.
Thank you for having me.
It's a great topic, unfortunately.
Oh, it is. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you and what's going on, and then your grand mission, because I love this mission. And I told you before the recording started that, let's get to them when they're young, right?
Oh my goodness, you have to. You absolutely have to. And I feel like I essentially am creating a manual for parents in reverse, because I look back at what I did, and it's easy. I know it's easy to armchair quarterback your parenting style when you're past a certain point.
Yeah.
But when I go out and talk to parents, I was in a room full of parents, and I said, I remember when my kids were in elementary school, I was that parent. I was the parent who I was going to insert myself in their lives. I was going to keep an eye on everything. I mean, I had this grand plan that I was going to be able to control all the variables and keep my kids from getting into trouble or having problems. And so I didn't work. I stayed home. I had a very lucrative job that I quit. I stayed home. I joined the PTA. I volunteered at school. I was on a first name basis with all my kids' teachers. I mean, that's who I was. I was so on top of things. And it's just so ironic that you fast forward to years later, and I was giving a presentation to guidance counselors in our district and talking to them about the troubles that girls have with social media. And I was showing them, in fact, I have it for you. I showed them this graphic that I made where you have a girl. And I said, this is a girl who's trying to figure out how to navigate the jungle, which the jungle is social media landscape. And this was when social media was still relatively new. And so I'm talking to these guidance counselors about this kid that's, just huddled up in a corner and saying, you've got to do everything you can. You got to work with parents to make sure that this doesn't become their child. And little did I know that would be my own daughter. Just fast forward 2 years and that would be her. And I had no idea. And so when I start talking with parents and I've seen the same reaction on their faces when I say, I get you. I know you're out there thinking, okay, it's like taking out an insurance policy. I'm going to do all these things to make sure that my kids are going to be okay. And there is no such insurance policy. There's no guarantee. You have to do what you can, do your best, get out there, make sure you're communicating with them. Mm-hmm. But what I really try to talk about is how even when you think you have a handle on everything going on, you don't. You just don't. And so the things that you need to be aware of, that's really what I start talking to parents about.
Mm-hmm.
And I started my brand and my company. This was even before my daughter got into some trouble at school with her health, and which I'll get into. But I actually started this whole thing because I was having lunch when my kids were in elementary school. I was eating lunch at their school, and I was just watching girls at the next table. And I watched girls picking on one girl at this lunch table. There were two of them. And I'm watching her just slowly break down. And I'm looking around thinking, does anybody see this? I mean, this is happening right in front of everyone. And finally, one of the lunch aides came over and she talked to the girls. She said, leave this girl alone. They said, oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. She leaves. And I just keep watching. And they don't stop. They don't continue to communicate verbally. They
Right.
start doing a whole bunch of nonverbal stuff, and they're just shooting, glances at each other and at her. And I think she's literally
Mm.
just wilting. And I'm watching this thinking, I can't believe how awful girls continue to be to each other. And I went home that night, and my mom was a big influence in my life at that point because she was still alive, and she was a teacher, and she had dual degrees in education and counseling. And I said, Mom, I reflected to my fifth grade year when I was having problems with girls at school. And my mom took me to the doctor, and I was tested for all kinds of things to find out I had a nervous stomach because I didn't want to go to school because I was being
Mm.
bullied by one girl.
Yeah.
And I thought, here we are, and things aren't getting any better. In fact, now they're worse for girls. They're
Yeah.
so much worse
Yeah.
because at that time I could leave all of that at school, and girls can't now.
Right.
It
Social media takes it everywhere.
it's
Everywhere.
everywhere.
24/7.
It is. And so looking at that, I said, I want to develop some way of trying to teach girls through the experiences of others how to behave and how, what the consequences of their actions are. And so I love the idea of dropping a trail of breadcrumbs and helping girls find their way back to. And so I thought, girls are essentially lost, and
Yeah.
they need breadcrumbs to find their way. And so I developed my own breadcrumbs, which are Penelope Pumpernickel, Rachel Rye, Samantha Sourdough, and Whitney Wheat. They're depicted on my book here. These are a couple of them. They leave a trail for girls to follow, to learn about friendship and resilience and connection and ultimately acceptance. And so this all started when my girls were still in elementary school, and I started putting all of this together. And in fact, I was out talking at schools, and I was really getting some traction. I was giving assemblies to both girls and to teachers and to guidance counselors. And then in the middle of my youngest daughter's seventh grade year, she got sick and she started fainting. And it's one of those situations where I could not, for the life of me, figure out what was going on with her. We were at the mall, and we'd gotten out of the car, and we were walking into the door of one of the stores, and over she goes on the asphalt, just down.
Oh God.
And at first I thought, I couldn't figure out. I thought, what's she doing? Is she trying to get my attention? And so I said, Emily, what's wrong with you? And she looked up at me, and she had tears in her eyes, and she didn't know where she was. And I realized that she had completely passed out. And so we got her together, and we got her in the car. And, this all came. She's in the middle of her seventh grade school year. She was, this
Wow.
kid excelled in academics. She played at the end of her sixth grade year. She was both in volleyball and swimming at the same time and managed that. And she had been chosen to be captain of this flicker ball team, which, don't even ask me what it is. It's a sport they play at school. And so but it's a very physical sport. She was captain of the team, and 2 or 3 days before Christmas, she sprained her ankle. And we think that was what triggered what ended up happening with her, because she went through a period of deconditioning. And that, for a lot of kids that have this particular, and it's what she's experiencing, is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS. And I guarantee there are going to be parents out there saying, I know somebody with POTS, or my daughter has POTS, or everywhere I talk about this, people come up to me and say,
I've
oh,
never heard of it.
And it is, in fact, now it's becoming much more familiar to people, because long COVID and POTS are very similar in their symptoms. It falls under this umbrella of something called dysautonomia, which is your autonomic nervous system quits functioning properly. And so they start having all these different symptoms. Well, for her, the first thing we noticed, obviously, is when she'd stand up, the blood would pool in her legs instead of pumping efficiently to her brain. And so your heart then tries to compensate for that. So your heartbeat speeds up, you get lightheaded, over you go. And so that was the first symptom that she started showing. And she fainted like a couple of days later. I was doing the dishes. I saw her get up, take 3 steps, down she went. And then all of a sudden she had a myriad of other kinds of problems. And it's all related to the dysautonomia piece of this. Her digestion slowed down, and she had gastroparesis, and she had, brain fog, and she had just generalized pain throughout her body. And before we knew it, she couldn't get out of bed. And we had 2 parents that had no idea what we were dealing with. My husband at the time was working as a nurse in the Navy, and I am literally hitting, Dr. Google, what on earth is going on with my kid? And it wasn't until our older daughter had a friend over, and I was doing research, and he said, what is it that she's complaining of? And so I went through the whole list of symptoms that were the problem. And he said, oh, she's got POTS. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, I know someone with POTS, and that's what she has. And so I looked it up, and all of a sudden it was like, oh my goodness. Yes, 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 yes. And so I called my husband and I said, I think Emily has POTS. And so he started researching it, and he said, well, we don't want her to have POTS. And I said, well, that's great. I realize we don't want her to, but I think that's what's going on. So we ended up flying her out to Virginia to be seen by a specialist to confirm the diagnosis and to give us some kind of a plan on what we needed to do. She had to start drinking salt water, and we got her on different kinds of medications just to get her upright. And it took us, she was on hospital homebound for 3 months in 7th grade. So you think middle school, that's a difficult time to miss. So she missed a whole lot of school, and we worked to slowly get her upright. And again, looking back, we needed to get her upright faster. We did things wrong because we didn't know what we didn't know.
Right.
But she got to the point where we had her up and around, and she said, okay, I think I'm ready. And so she talked about how she could not wait to go back to school, and the administration and her teachers were wonderful, but she finally has that day where she goes back to school. And I remember she came home and she said to me, so these girls that she went to school with, they said, so what's wrong with you? And she really couldn't explain to them what her condition was. It was difficult for her to understand, much less try to explain.
Right.
And so they looked at her and they said, well, you don't look sick. So what's the deal? Were you faking it? And I, believe it or not, got a call a couple of days after she returned to school. One of her teachers called me and said, is everything okay with your daughter? And I said, she was in school today, was she not? And she said, yeah, I'm not referring to that. She said, there are rumors circulating around the school that she drank bleach.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. How do you reel that back in?
And so, here you have one trauma that your poor kid is dealing with, to come to terms with the fact that she has this chronic condition that she's going to have to deal with most likely for the rest of her life. And on top of that, now you layer what happens at school with girls, because they, instead of trying to understand what was going on with her, they developed their own narrative. And that's what took that narrative. It took hold. And she would come home saying, Mom, you just wouldn't believe. And I said, oh no, I would believe. I'm getting phone calls. And as a parent, it's just mind-boggling to me what girls will do and how the lengths that they go to really, it goes so far beyond just being mean. There's a cruelty among girls that has to be addressed. And it's interesting because I've talked with teachers, and I was at a conference recently, and this high school principal, it was so fascinating to me. He said, listening to you, it reminds me of a time when I had to say to the parents, we have a bullying problem in our school. And he said, the biggest problem with this bullying problem that we have is that we can't see it. We
Yeah.
know it's here, and yet we can't see it because
Yep.
it's the girls.
Yep.
It's not the boys. It's the girls. And I said, this is where schools miss the mark. They
Yeah.
miss it completely, because the anti-bullying programs that they put out there, it's really, it takes your typical schoolyard bully, what that looks like, which is physical and
Right.
loud and right out there in your face. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not what's happening at these schools.
Right.
Until schools start really adopting ways to start finding out what's going on. And I know it's hard with girls. And this is where parents really have to kind of step up and
Yes.
pay more attention to what's going on at home.
Right. Right. And as I mentioned, and this is what's really sad, and we were talking about this before we started recording too, is kids act out for a reason. These
Yes.
girls are behaving the way they are for a reason. These kids
Yes.
aren't born bad and they're just bad kids. There's something going on, and it feels like, and you've got way more experience in this than I do, but it feels almost like they've got an underlying anger within them, and they're acting it out in
Yes.
this scenario or these scenarios. And
Yes.
it's this passive aggressive underlying strife
It
that you're
is.
right. You can't see it. And
It
unless
is.
you are like you were at the school and you were sitting right there, and you were, first of all, you were sitting right there. And then you had the self-awareness, or you had the awareness to look over and pay attention to what's going on. And unless you do that, you are going to miss this. I
Yes.
know. Okay, I'm 61 years old. I experienced bullying in junior high. Junior high is a terrible time. It's a difficult time in the
Awful.
best of circumstances. But your poor daughter, she is out sick. And you guys, and that is traumatic. That is a trauma right there, her being sick. And then you guys couldn't figure out for a while what was going on. That's frightening.
Oh. And
Then you guys,
I mean, I see a picture being in the fetal position in my office, literally just think, please, just help me figure out what's going on with my kid. I can't
yeah,
handle her being sick and going through this, and everything that really related just to her illness, beyond everything that she had to deal with going back to school with. And again, you think school is going to be a certain way, and it just, it
it's
just
not.
crushed me that she looked forward thinking that
Yeah,
kids were going to be accepting, and they just weren't. They just weren't. And yes,
yeah,
I
yeah,
talk about when I go out and talk to parents, and I tell them the key really to prevent this starts when they're young. And
yeah.
that's a hard one for parents to really get, because in the research that I have done, and there's a book, and I always promote this book. This book is so fantastic. It's called Little Girls Can Be Mean. And the two PhDs that wrote this, Doctors Anthony and Linder, they really looked at these specific behaviors in girls. And they said, here's the thing. There's a window of opportunity that parents have up to the point where girls are probably right around third grade. You can kind of mold and shape their behaviors because their identities aren't set. It's like they're trying out different behaviors. So they try things out. And girls start relational aggression nonsense in kindergarten. They start doing the "I won't be your friend," this phrases. But they test those things to see if anyone's going to tell them, "Hey, that's not cool." And if they don't get that kind of feedback, they think, "This is working for me."
Mm-hmm.
And so third grade, all of a sudden, their behaviors are set, and they become less responsive to authoritative figures and adults telling them, "Hey, don't do that. Don't act that way." And that is really where they take those behaviors, they mold it into this great, and they take it right to middle school. And that's where everything just explodes in middle
Mm-hmm.
school. And so you really have,
Their little hormones are
yes,
going
when
crazy now.
everything is going at the same time. So
Yeah, it's
you have girls who are trying, they come up with this idea or this notion of who they are based on what they think works for them. Then they go to middle
mm,
school, and you combine that with hormonal imbalances and all of the things, and they're trying to figure everything out. And it just creates a scenario where you have, much like what my daughter went through, Oh, middle school. And I absolutely loved the middle school that she went to. It was a fantastic middle school. But I tell you,
Mm,
it only takes one or two
yeah.
really, really persuasive kids to turn everything on its head. I mean, it
Yeah.
really does. It doesn't take that many. But when I talk to parents about this and I start telling them, this is the child, and I will say, you really need to start having conversations with them when your daughters are young about their friendships. Ask them specific questions about their friendships and the kinds of people that they associate with and how they act, and get that kind of information from them. And I cannot tell you how many times a parent will come up to me after and will say to me, uh, my daughter's really not having any of these issues at school. She's not having any problems at all. And there was at one particular school, this parent says this to me, and I said, well, one or two things could be happening then. A, maybe she's not really talking to you about it. Maybe you're not having the right kinds of conversations. Or B, maybe she's the problem. Maybe she is the mean girl. And man, I had another parent come up to me later and said, thank you so much for saying that. Because parents don't stop to think, could my kid actually be the problem? And
Yeah.
there are signs and there are things I put out on my socials. I will put out all the time how to detect maybe if your daughter is the mean girl, and how to switch out behaviors one at a time, how to start tweaking little things to say, hey, you know what, let's try something different and see if you can't make some changes before that child then heads, middle school and high school,
Hmm.
terrorizing
Yeah.
her peers.
Well, let's
And
let's let's talk about that. So let's talk about that. I mean, what do you say to the parents? Because there's both. There's the children that are being bullied, and then there's the children that are the bullies. And so, what do you say to each one of those parents?
to the parents of the child who's being bullied, the biggest challenge with that kid is really to have some open dialogue and constant communication with
Hmm.
them, because a lot of times kids don't want to talk about it because they're embarrassed.
Yeah, they're ashamed.
And that's such a hard one to, and that's, I tell you, when I go out and start working with, I've worked with the girls at the Boys and Girls Club here locally, and I have puppets that I take with me, which you can kind of see up, they're up there somewhere, you see
Oh
them.
yeah. Oh, they're so cute.
So I take those with me, and I will ask the girls. I just put it straight out there, and this is what I try to encourage parents to do. I'll just ask them straight out, here's a situation, and I'll give them a situation. It's usually a story taken from one of my books, and I say, has this ever happened with you with your friends? And they'll sit back and think, no, 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 no. We don't have those issues. We don't have those problems. No, I can't think of a time. And so then I say, okay, well, we're going to do something a little different. So then I get the puppets and we do a little bit of role playing, and we will do something similar to this exact same scenario that I just depicted in the story. And now it's with the puppets. And as we go through and they see the reactions that the puppets are having with the conflict in the story, but it's not, I'm not saying it's them, and I'm not saying that it's any one of their friends. Now it's just a fictional character
Hmm.
having a fictional problem. And then all of a sudden they start saying, oh, well, you should see when so and so did. I mean, then they just start offering up information because they don't feel like they're being interrogated. And the same holds true with our kids. If you are in an environment, and like I have my baking book, my interactive baking book, I'm really trying to push. During the pandemic, one of the things that people claimed they found as a result of being under lockdown for some period of time was that the kitchen was the greatest place. That was like
Hmm.
the place where people really connected.
Yeah.
And so I said, that's where you need to use places like that rather than sitting your child down on the couch or wherever and saying, hey, something's up. What's going on with you? That's really not the way you're going to get any kind of answer to that question. Whereas if you're doing something together
Hmm.
and you are actually spending that kind of time, and I even try to weave these questions in, like we make dough, and as you're making dough you talk about, wow, if you don't like the way something turns out, it's so easy to tweak it or make changes to it. Can you imagine if life were like that? What would you change if you could change anything? Just something that seems very benign in terms
Yes.
of question, but has very, very strong implications in terms of what they might then offer up to you. And that's the way you start getting information out of somebody who really doesn't want to offer it. I can't tell you how many times I have the best conversations with my youngest one who will not talk. And I have two girls, one who tells me everything. She is an open book. She tells me stuff whether I want to hear it or not. She just hear it. This is who I am. And I love that about her. But the youngest, she doesn't tell me anything. And I have found that we don't have very constructive conversations when I start just asking her outright questions. It never happens that way. But when we start doing something together and we can start just slowly getting into some heavier discussions, but we do it in a very, and I know it's a pun, but a very organic way, then she's much more apt to open up and start talking with me because she doesn't feel like I'm necessarily putting her on the defensive.
Right.
It's so much more natural.
You're creating a safe space for her is what you're doing.
You are. And in a way that, and I got to tell you, because this is a kid who, after what she went through in middle school, that was the start of it. We got her into therapy, and I thought, she doesn't talk to me, fine, but she will talk to a therapist, only to find out much later that she had figured out what exactly to say to the therapist. She thought, she's a people pleaser. She always has been. Her first grade teacher said, you got to watch this one because she's all about pleasing people. And so she would go into a therapist and she's smart enough to think, okay, I've got to figure out exactly how I'm going to answer these questions. So I pass. I mean, she wanted to get like the highest grade to do. So we spent years with her in therapy where she wasn't telling the therapist anything, nothing. And that is just, and it took finally, and I mean, this, not until things got really, really difficult with her, and which I didn't know until, and this is the other, when you start talking about what are the warning signs to look for. Some of them, of course, are very obvious. She's a very, very good student. Her grades started to drop significantly. And I asked her about it, and she said, it's not a big deal. It's, this is just a bump in the semester. I can figure it out. And I said, okay. And then slowly she started becoming more and more reserved, and she's already a quiet person. She started spending way too much time in her room. And then I don't know what's going on with her until she finally just comes out to me one night and says, I started cutting myself because
bless her heart.
I don't know how to deal with everything that's going on in my life right now. And that is one of those moments where, and this was after years and years of therapy, but she wasn't really doing the work and getting her books and getting her workbooks she wasn't doing the work. She just wasn't doing it. And so trying to figure out, and that's why when I say to parents, it's so hard. You can never quit trying, obviously. But when you see warning signs, you can't say, maybe this is a fluke, because there is no such thing. If your kid is a straight A or, an honor roll student and they're not doing well in their classes, something's wrong. If they start spending more time in their room and they're withdrawing more than usual and even claiming that they've taken up reading or something, or who knows what, something is wrong. So there were signs that we missed. And of course, I was busy, and I tell parents all the time, I said, there's so much time that you're spending in places where you could really be just taking the time to observe behavior. And I mean, I looked back at how I sat and observed so much behavior when I was at their school because I had opportunity. And that's really a moment where you, as a parent, have to start really observing the behaviors and start piecing things together. So I talk about the experiences that I've had with my kid. It's really interesting as I have shared this with groups of parents in a room. And I mean, you could hear a pin drop when I tell them, when you think you have a plan and you are working your plan and everything seems to be going according to plan. And then something happens that you have no control over, like they get sick. And then all of a sudden, one little thing like that takes you off that path that you're on turns into a complete spiral.
Yeah.
And boy, And, I was listening to one of the podcasts that you had with the gentleman, Scotty, who was talking
Mm-hmm.
about, instead of coming up with a plan of what things you should be doing, how can I help my kids? What negative things can you eliminate?
Yeah, I know. Isn't
It
that great?
resonated with me because,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, when I talk to parents about how to help your kids as they get older, and I've really looked at what schools are doing, and I applaud them for taking phones away. When our
Right.
daughter got sick, we were at that time somewhat grateful that she had a connection with her kids via her phone and social media.
Right.
It's at a time when I had no idea. I didn't know really what Instagram was. I wasn't on Instagram. I didn't know what Snapchat was. I wasn't familiar. And it's the whole keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer.
Mm-hmm.
If parents are going to let their kids be on these platforms, you need to be on that platform with them.
Absolutely.
You need to have a buddy who is friends with them, who can keep you in the loop as to what's going on
Mm-hmm.
if they're on that platform. But I tell you what, I preach all the time when I go out, keep them off social media as long as possible.
Yep.
If you can keep them off until they're 18, great. If you can keep them off till they're 16, that's something, but keep
Yeah.
them off. Keep them off if you can. And so I started doing research into anxiety and depression. And because, again, after going through this with my kid, you become that parent who I start wanting to know who my enemy is. And so I started researching why girls are experiencing such high levels of anxiety, depression, and yes, suicide. And I know in February of this year, the CDC came out and said girls are experiencing the highest level. First, they were saying in a decade. Now they're saying ever, 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 ever.
God.
And if you look, Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Anxious Generation, he talks about how there's this spike in girls with anxiety and depression and how it happened, after they look at like 2010, 2012, like right at 2012 is when it really started hitting.
Hmm.
And so you look at, and all the research they were looking at, well, what was it that led to this? And of course
Mm-hmm.
they were looking at, it was this a rise in school shootings. And so the research they were looking at, like, yeah, that could be a factor, but this is a worldwide problem. And the school shootings are much more of a US problem. So it's probably not the school shootings. And then, so they started looking at, is it financial concerns? Is it the environment? What is it that's leading girls? And all of a sudden they started focusing in on when cell phones came out and when
Yeah.
they built smartphones, not just cell phones, smartphones.
Right. Where they have
And
access to the internet.
when they have access to the internet,
Mm-hmm.
and then when social media really hit.
Right.
And right at 2012, all of a sudden you have all these social media platforms that started, and girls just gravitated to social media.
Yeah.
And he even talks about how boys look for age. I mean, everybody's looking for agency to some extent, but boys really kind of look for agency, and girls are looking for communion. They're looking for fellowship. They're looking for, it's like, I want acceptance. And you have these social media platforms out there selling it.
Oh,
Right
yeah.
here is where you need to be. This is where your community lives. Join, and you'll feel like you're a part of something. And the girls were just giving up everything to be part of something that really wasn't feeding them any kind of nutrients. It was
No, but
just,
it gave them acceptance. They
but
felt accepted. They finally felt
them,
accepted.
they felt accepted by
Mm-hmm.
something.
Right.
And I tell you,
Oh my God.
looking back, I remember thinking I was so happy that she had connection to her friends via these social media platforms. And both of my daughters have come back saying to us, social media about destroyed me, flat
Oof.
out destroyed me, because it was so toxic. And, you look
Mm-hmm.
at that, and that's why I tell parents, I said, if we could go back, we would do this so differently. And even
Mm-hmm.
our girls said, if we could go back, we would rather not have ever been on these platforms, at very least not been on them until maybe once we were through high school, but
Yeah.
absolutely not be on them prior to that.
Mm-hmm.
And kids are getting on these platforms in elementary school.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
it's starting so young. And I tell parents, oh my gosh, you have opportunities to make so many great changes with your kids if you are willing to do it. And I know the pushback I get from parents where they say, yeah, but all of their friends have phones and all of their friends are on socials and all of their friends. And I said, A, you can't parent all of their friends, but you can parent your own.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's really an issue, then get your core group of parents who your kids are friends with. And if you don't know them, you should. And you get together and you make a pact and you say, guess what? We're going to keep all of our kids off of socials. We're going to do it together, because if they have other kids who are saying, well, I'm not on socials either because my parents won't let me, you have your core group of friends who are doing things the same way. That's all you need. That's the insulation that they need
Right.
to address the rest of the group. So, but it's a hard one. I get a lot of pushback from parents when I start suggesting this. And I know, and it's hard to admit it, but I know a lot of parents feel like that's something that keeps their kids engaged. And for some reason, they think that that kind of engagement is going to help them. And that is a complete lie. It is a total lie.
You know, and parents these days really have their hands full because there's so many of them that both of them work full-time jobs.
Yes.
You know, you're in survival mode. I mean,
You
that's how I was.
Yes.
You know, you've only got the evening and the morning and then the weekends, and you try to do the best you can. And when my son was young, it was more the games, right? The video games.
Yes.
The smartphones weren't quite out, and he wasn't really into phones anyway. But I had to set up. I was so strict about his video, when he played, how much he played, what he played. I had complete control. Excuse me. I had complete control over what he played, when he played it, how long he played it. And we had this whole structure in place because, you know, for boys, that's usually what kind of pulls them in, is the video games, right?
It is.
And that's a whole dark area too. I mean, we could have a whole nother podcast on that, you know, because that's a whole nother dark area. And you know, he took that behavior actually into his adult life. He doesn't play video games now anymore, but in his young adult life, when he, you know, turned 18, he kind of kept you know, like I literally had him set a timer. Like he was only allowed to play a certain amount of time. And when that timer went off, that was it. I don't care if you're in the middle of some shooting game or something or whatever you're playing, it's time to stop.
Yep.
And I know he still struggled. He still struggled later on and caught himself though. He was able to catch himself playing a little too much and getting caught up in it. He stopped.
Yeah.
But I think
that's because it's not that you actually impose those guidelines, and he learned to respect them, which paid off in the end for him.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah, it did.
And that's what it takes. And that's a hard one for parents, because I know kids right now, kids expect to have cell phones by a certain age.
I know.
They expect to have access to a lot of this by a certain age.
And they have access to computers.
Yes.
And they have to for school.
Yes. Yes. And so the parents who say to me, and I've had a few of them come up to me and say, well, because I'm concerned about my child's safety at school, I want to know that they'll be able to get a hold of me. And I said, there are plenty of phones.
Yes.
Where they can still get a hold of you, but they are not given access to everything.
Correct.
Those phones are there. So that you can take that. And again, I understand, and she's worried because the school's taking the phones away. She's worried about how will I be contacted in the event of. And I said, you know, there's a whole risk benefit ratio thing going on here, where you have to think, what is the highest risk to my child? You know, what are the chances? And I know for those who go through something as horrific as a school shooting, I cannot even imagine. But I also think that schools are getting to the point where they have ways of contacting parents in that, you know, in that particular situation, where kids don't need to be depending on their phones to try to communicate with parents. I just don't think that really places, you know, that kind of importance above their mental health over a span of how many years of becoming completely dependent on something that really is not going to serve them in terms of their own mental health long term.
I am such a firm believer in letting kids be kids.
Oh my gosh.
Like, let this adult stuff come to them when
Wait.
they're adults? Because like they're going to have how many years on a phone? They're going to have how many years on the internet, right? And
Yes,
us adults can struggle with all of this, right? How can we expect a kid to be able to manage it properly? We
exactly.
have to teach them,
Exactly.
right?
And
Easier.
that's the whole issue. And I'm glad that you brought this up, because when you talk about the boys, you were exactly right. The boys tend to go more towards gaming,
Mm-hmm.
and the girls go towards the social media stuff. And the issue becomes that girls become completely absent from their physical lives, because even when they're present with you, they're waiting for a text, or to check their likes, or to see about a photo, or taking a photo, or setting up the perfect photo.
Yeah.
They're completely absent from their lives.
Yeah.
So they're not living this authentic life anymore. They're living and
Oh, yeah.
it's taking its toll on their psyche. It is completely tearing down girls. And this is why we talk about, I mean, I'm trying to teach parents and talk to parents about building the right kinds of connections with your kids. And yes, I say start when they're young and start having the conversations. Take their phone, put their phone, for one thing, they shouldn't have phones when they're this big.
No.
But if they do, put the phones away, do things with them that don't involve the phones. And you need to, again, much like what you did, you need to take those kinds of habits and continue as they get older. Because if they are spending enough time, and Jonathan Haidt did research on college kids where they had to completely walk away from social media and their phones for a certain period of time. And during that time, their depression levels lifted. It's just incredible.
Mm-hmm.
They've talked about girls who spent time in the hospital who couldn't be on their phones for a period of time, and how it lifts them out of this depth of despair that they have constantly being on their phones. And parents see this. I mean, it's so obvious that there's a change in their behavior and how much more present they are when they're around you, when they're away from that. And yet we all just kind of slide back into what's comfortable, and then wonder why we have this huge problem that we have. And it just takes a real commitment. It takes an absolute commitment from the parent and from the child. And I think you have to
Mm-hmm.
kind of enter into this understanding when they're younger, so that it's easier as they get older, that that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be the commitment you're going to have to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I say this because I tell parents all the time, you don't want to be that parent. You don't want to be that parent who's taking a trip to the hospital to make sure your kid's going to be okay. You don't want to be that parent. I've been there. It is the worst possible place you can ever see yourself in your lifetime. It is literally, I mean, I don't think there is a lower point in my life than
Mm-hmm.
that moment. And so when I say to parents, you have opportunities. You can make these changes, and you can start at a young age. I just don't know what would ever keep a parent from doing it. And it's nice because for the most part, a lot of parents are saying, we are seeing this pushback from schools, and we do think it's a good idea. And we know, and I know parents are busy. I get it. And I know that with as expensive as things are, and two income families and a lot of single moms, and I give nothing but credit to single moms, but I know some who are still very much a part of their kids' lives. I mean, so much so that they can still kind of keep tabs on everything going on. It's a commitment that you have to make, and you have to make young and keep it going.
And if you think about it, it's not that long that you have to have that commitment, because they're
No,
only
it's
young for a certain amount of
right.
time.
And it
So
goes fast.
it goes so fast. It goes so fast. And so it's a small investment that you need to make, but it has big results. I know
Huge,
that to be true.
huge.
So what do you tell parents? Like you have a parent in front of you who either has a child who is a bully or a child who is being bullied, and they're recognizing this. How do they help their child? How do they help them?
If you have a child who is, and it's funny you say that, because I have actually been in situations where I'm been talking to people, and I will talk to them about the things that I'm doing, and I've had moms who have said, I think my daughter is the mean girl. And I'll say, really? So what are you doing about that? And the easiest thing in the world for a parent to do, it's so much similar to what the parents of the kids who are being bullied do, which is you start looking at situations and you start saying to me, or saying to them, excuse me, so when she did this or did that, what was your response to that? And really start taking cues. If you let your child tell you, they will let you know where they stand in the hierarchy with their friends. It's
Yeah.
pretty easy when you
Mm-hmm.
start saying, and again, there are certain behaviors you'll know from feedback that you're going to get from their teachers. The teachers will a lot of times key into this in classrooms, and they'll
Mm-hmm.
see, they know who the problem child is a lot of the times. And again, you have to hope that the parents of the difficult child are actually the kind of parents who are engaged. They
Yeah.
may not always be. There are situations. My daughter was bullied by a girl whose parents were not in the picture. They just weren't.
Mm.
And she was from a broken home, and the parents were in the process of splitting, and there was no going to that parent saying, hey, do you know what your child is doing? That just wasn't
Yeah.
going to happen. So if the parent is actually interested and concerned and wants to uh, go through the process of actually trying to change the behavior, there are opportunities to do it. When they're younger, it's much easier because you can go through role playing exercises. In fact, on my social media, I put out, here are the steps. There are certain steps that you go through where you have to listen and actually identify that this is happening with your child. And you can kind of determine based on their responses to certain questions about how they handle their friends. And then you talk about other, like pivoting, other ways of handling these situations and role playing. And those kinds of things that you do when they're younger will help set them up where they start saying, hey, you know what? I mean, this is where you can guide them by saying, so when you responded this way,
Mm-hmm.
how is it accepted by your friends? What do they think about this? And listen to what they say, because they have to actually identify that this behavior is not winning their friends over, that the behavior
Right.
is actually hurtful. A lot of times young girls will miss that what they're doing is actually
Uh,
being perceived as a type of bullying. And it still is. In fact, I did a post recently on my social media that talks about, parents will say, but at a certain age, you really can't call it bullying, because maybe they're being mean, but it's all in how things are being interpreted. And so I say, that's where the light bulb should be going off, saying, okay,
mm-hmm.
if they're hurting someone's feelings, if you're finding out from a parent or from a teacher or even from a child or from your own daughter, I did this and she got so upset and she started crying. Okay, well, let's look at this. What
Mm-hmm.
is it you said? How did you say it? How is it received? And then, because a lot of time these kids, they don't think, wow,
Right.
that was actually something that I did that hurt her feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're young enough, that's where you can actually say, okay, you know what? Maybe we can look at this a little bit differently. Let's think of a way that you can handle this where she might not get as upset, where she might not see this as being something that you're doing that's mean, and start tweaking those behaviors then. Because like I said earlier, if they're doing that, if they're hurting their friends' feelings, if they're doing things that are going to be labeled as bullying behaviors, and ultimately they would be as she gets older, if you're actually addressing it when she's young, then she's getting that kind of feedback that says, okay, this isn't who I want to be. This is obviously hurting her feelings. My parents are coming down on me. My teacher's not happy with me. I'm not going to keep doing this. But if you're not talking to her about it, then she's getting, this is okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is being accepted. No one's telling me this is wrong. Okay, so she got upset and she started crying, but that was really all that happened to me. So it's going to pass muster. I'm going to keep doing it. That's the kind of reinforcement that they get where they think, this is normal. You're normalizing that
Mm,
behavior.
yeah.
And then they just start ramping it up. And before you know it, then I say, the young girls, they start off the relational aggression that starts off with, if you don't sit next to me, I won't be your friend anymore,
Mm,
turns into something totally different in fifth grade, and something even more different in middle school, and then something even more different in high school. And
yeah.
as so many women say, and then these mean girls go on to become mean women. And I said, of course they do.
Yep.
Of course they do. Because there's still, that behavior was normalized from a young age.
Yep.
no one has ever said to her, you have to stop doing this. This isn't going to fly. I mean, that's really, and if
Yeah.
she doesn't get it from her parents and she doesn't get it from her teacher and she doesn't get it from her peers, and that's how we ended up stopping it with one girl in sixth grade is the teachers couldn't do anything about it. And so as a group, we got a group of girls together and we confronted our bully and said, no more, we're done.
Good.
And that was the only way that, because finally she had somebody in her face saying, this is not how we will be treated any longer. You're going to stop or you will have no friends.
You know what's interesting is talking about this behavior it's similar to someone being raised with childhood abuse, and the behavior that we develop that works for us when we're kids and we're in that hot mess and that's going on with us, and we recognize, oh, that behavior worked for that. And so we store that back there. And so the next time a similar scenario comes up, we just pull that out and we use that.
Yep.
And until someone corrects us and says, no, that's not the right way to do it, you're going to continue to do it. And I'm sitting here thinking, it's so true in this. Those young girls that aren't taught the proper way to treat another person and turn into bullies absolutely are the mean women. And I have met many of them. And I can't tell you how many times I've said to them, that's like 7th grade behavior. I cannot tell you how many times I've said that. It's like I'm in junior high again.
It is 7th grade behavior because it still works.
It still works.
Still gets the same result. They are going after the same result. They're thinking it worked for me in kindergarten. It worked for me in 5th grade. It worked for me in 7th grade, and it's still working.
And they become masters at it. They become masters because, and it's those ones where they do. How about this one? Oh, this one really, boy, you want to make me mad? Do this one. You say stuff to me that you won't say around other people. Mm-hmm. It's that little passive aggressive little shot at you.
It is.
But then in front of everybody else, they are smiling. They love you. You're the best. But behind closed doors, yeah. I fortunately, those women are not in my life anymore. And I see them coming a mile away and I avoid them like the plague. But that is a common one. And see, I call people out on that. That infuriates me. Absolutely infuriates me.
And that is, and if you think about when your girls are little, and I mean, I focus on girls, and I know I've been asked, so why don't you have any boy crumbs? And there's a lot of reasons for that.
Yeah, it's a whole different animal. Really,
it is. They bully. They communicate differently. They bully differently.
Yep.
You can't fix the same with one brush. It takes two totally different approaches. But with respect to girls, if you think about the way that they're behaving, and I know I've had parents that they detect it, this kind of behavior in their kid. And I think some parents take some pride in it because they do. They see it and they say, and I think in some way they think, well, at least I know she can stick up for herself. And they don't see 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
All of the damage that's done from that kind of behavior because you don't take the time when they're young to say, no, this isn't going to fly. You really, this is going to cause you, in the end, you're going to get more enemies and you're going to create more hurt from this kind of behavior than any little bit of pride that I might take that you, so to speak, stood up for yourself, when really it's not standing up for yourself. It's just being mean. It's
and imagine, so the damage that this person is creating around them, imagine the damage inside of them because of what they're doing. Like,
yes.
Good people or people who are healthy don't treat other people like that. Again, it goes back to people act out for a reason.
Yes. Yeah. So when at the time, the gal she was kind of my arch nemesis. We were friends and then we weren't friends in high school. I mean, it started in 5th grade. And by the time we got to high school, we kind of had it out. And we did so in a room full of girls. And I was just pressing her for, I want to know why. I want to know why you're doing this to me. Because she was, when I was pinpointing like what she was saying about me at school and why she was, what she had to back it up, and she couldn't back it up. And I was being seen. She was saying things about me at school that were untrue. And the teacher who was involved, who said, okay, we're going to air all of this in front of everyone, saw that I was saying to her, okay, I just want dates, times, proof. I just want to know when I said things that you said that I said. She couldn't provide that. She broke down. She started crying. Everyone was going to her rescue. And the teacher realized, she thought, oh, this isn't going well at all.
Yeah.
So, okay, enough of this. She pulled just the two of us aside, put us in a room together, sat us down and said, figure it out, and shut the door. And I turned and said, why? Why are you doing this to me? And she said, because I feel like you took my friends from me. My two closest friends, we were all friends at one point. We split off. They started hanging out with me, and she started hanging out with other people. And she said, you took them from me. And I said, I didn't do anything of the sort. I said, they made a decision. That's it. And at this point, I said, we have 2 weeks left of high school. We can either continue to fight with one another through the next 2 weeks of high school, or we can just decide to finish out with some sort of peaceful coexistence where we just leave each other alone. And I said, and then we never have to see each other again. And we agreed. We shook hands. We said, for the next 2 weeks, we will leave each other alone. And I haven't seen her since. Not one time. It's really bizarre. We have never. And I'm curious that if now our paths were to cross, what the conversation would look like.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen her.
Interesting.
So it's really interesting. But again, there was hurt. That was where it was coming from. Mm-hmm. She was hurt by that idea that she had, that I had taken two people who were important to her from her, and she was getting me back for it. And that again, so there was something at the root of what was going on, and I had to get to the bottom of that. And then once we did, we said, okay, we're just going to leave each other alone. And we did. We finally, this was years. 5th grade to 12th, 7 years long. This went on. I know it.
Oh my goodness.
7 years. I know. And I am embarrassed. And I've said to people before that in 5th grade, she had the ability, when she was friends with you, boy, life was great. But when she decided that she wasn't going to be your friend, she could turn everyone from you, which was why I had such stomach problems, because I never knew on any given day where I was going to fall.
Yeah.
Am I going to be in favor or not in favor? And on the days that I kind of suspected that she wasn't going to like me, I didn't want to go to school. And so and the days that I was in favor, she picked on other people. And did I stand up for that person? Oh no, I didn't. It was a total bystander problem. I was so relieved that I was not the person being picked on.
Well, yeah, you were in survival mode.
I just tried to kind of fade into the background. I just did not want to. And I look back on that now and think, that is not at all what I would preach. That's not at all. I would tell people, and again, if my parents didn't know all of this, they knew very little. They just knew that I had a problem with the girls' school. They didn't know anything else. But trying to instill that into your child, to stand up for the ones being picked on, that's a hard. But boy, I wish I could go back and do that differently. I would.
My sweet husband was known in high school for beating up the bullies, because he could not stand to see anybody be picked on. And he was kind of big in high school. And so, and if you meet him in person, like the nicest guy, but it's just, he can't stand that injustice and to see somebody be mistreated. And so he got in a couple of, I guess, fights in high school because he would take on the bully.
I tell you, I have nothing but admiration for that, because that is a regret that I will always have, was that. And I remember even feeling so bad for the person who was being picked on, because I knew
what that feels like.
I knew, but I was terrified.
You were a kid.
Yeah, I know.
You were a kid. You were a kid in survival mode. I mean,
I know, but boy,
that's a lot to put on a little girl.
Yes, it is. It is. But there's a part of me that felt like I could have been that person. I could have been, but
But
it
you are
wasn't.
now.
But I am now,
You
so
are
I'm
now.
thankful for it now by
So
hopefully
yes.
saving whoever, that girl in the lunchroom who's getting picked on. Yes,
Yeah.
I will
Yeah.
save her now.
You're making a bigger difference now, right?
That's my
So who
hope.
knows what would have happened that day if you would have spoke up.
I know.
Where today you're speaking up and you're making a difference. And
I
you
hope.
are saving young ladies
I
and
hope. I
helping
just hope.
parents.
Well, and that's all I want to do. I have had so many moments since I started this. I went to the Girl Scout convention last year, and a little girl came by the booth, and I was making dough with girls and talking to the parents at the same time. So it was hard because I'm teaching the girls how to make dough and I'm talking to the parents. And this little girl came up to the table and was watching me for a little while, and then she left. And she comes back and she's dragging her mom. I can see her just pulling her mom towards the table. And her mom said, okay, she brought me from all the way across the room over here to listen to you. What's your story? And so I said, well, and I kind of backed up and I started talking to her about my mission and what I'm doing and what I'm trying to preach to girls and how I'm just hoping that girls start treating each other a little bit better. And then I said, and then my daughter got sick in seventh grade, and she's got a chronic medical condition, and this gal said, if you don't mind me asking, what does she have? And I said, she has POTS. And she just burst into tears. She said, oh my
Oh.
goodness, I know now why I was supposed to come and talk to you. She said, my daughter's getting bullied. She's got POTS. We just found out this just happened. Oh, she just absolutely broke down and started sobbing. And it was so, I put my arms around her and I said, fight the good fight, mama. I said, you just know you're not alone. You are not alone. And her daughter was very, very small for her age. And she said, she was already at a disadvantage because she's small for her age. And
Mhm.
so, and I said, girls look for anything anyway to pick on. So
Oh,
they'll
they'll
find her,
find it.
they'll find it, and that's where they'll live. They set up camp right there, and that's where they will live. And I said, as long as you know that. But I said, here's the thing. I said, just having an understanding of what she's going through. And I said, and reaching out to other parents, I said, like me, who have been through this, I said, know that she's going to get through it. She will, and
Mhm.
she'll find a way to manage her symptoms. And I said, and what we're going to find is that there are more and more people. And sure enough, I mean, it's become, her daughter got this after having COVID, apparently. And
Oh.
since COVID now, so many people have this form of long COVID that they're finding is very similar to POTS. And so
Yeah.
it's becoming, I can't tell you how often I go and speak at places and people will come up to me afterwards and say, I have POTS, or my daughter has POTS, or we know somebody who has POTS. It's
It's
incredible.
so I've never heard of that. That is so interesting. So is COVID trigger it, or are they
It,
two separate? I mean,
they are separate, but it's triggered by, like, my daughter's situation, it was an injury and then deconditioning that led to her.
oh.
And it can be triggered by that. Mono is a big trigger for it. So it can be
Oh.
an illness that they have that triggers.
So
And
it's like dormant in their system and then
yes, and
something triggers it?
what we found with Emily was,
Mm.
and it's interesting because a lot of these POTS kids have a lot of the same characteristics. Emily is so type A. She's so high strung. And her first grade teacher came up to me and told me, this was like 2 or 3 weeks into the school year. She said, Emily she's got her citizenship card on her desk where she can see it. And she said, and it's pristine. She never gets a mark for being off task or talking or anything
Mm.
ever. And a little boy in the class just reached over with a pen and made a mark on her citizenship. And she had a complete meltdown.
Yeah.
And her teacher came to me and said, she can't handle, I mean, she's such a perfectionist that she can't
Oh.
handle anything like that. She's like, this kid might be a problem for you later on. And it's weird. But
Ah.
those kinds of things, she's always been like that. And then she had problems with her stomach, and she had problems with, she would get sick very easily if she got overheated at a theme park, and she had chronic stomach problems that were off and on throughout. I mean, there were just other little things that were triggers that we knew there were some indication that she had something, and then boom,
Yeah.
I mean, it
And
all,
then
yeah,
came
it
to a
just
head.
came to a head and showed up right after she got injured in seventh grade.
Interesting.
So, but
So it's
yeah,
almost like sh she's intense then is the way you're kind of
yes,
describing it, super intense. That's really hard on your body. And that, I mean, could you
yes,
imagine your adrenal glands going all the time?
yes.
That makes
She,
sense.
yeah, and she, she,
Bless her heart.
bless her heart. So her class got in trouble. They were at art one day, and somebody in the class was acting up. And so the art teacher got very upset and said, told the entire class, "You're done. You're not doing any more art today. Send the class back." And of course, the teacher said, "Okay, who was it that was acting up?" And the class kind of made this pact: we're not going to tell on each other, So they're like, "We're not going to do it." And so they all sat there, and she said, "You're either going to give me a student, or every single one of you is getting a mark on your citizenship." So think of
Oh.
my daughter, who was not the person that.
Oh no.
So, and I was at the school that day, and I was waiting. I'd been working in the PTA office, and I'm standing at the end of the hall, and I see her coming down the hall. The teacher's marching them to go get the bus, and she just looks sick. I mean, she's just green, and I'm thinking, "Oh my goodness, something is terribly wrong with her." And so she came up to me, and I said, "Emily, is everything all right?" And she was hyperventilating, and
Oh.
I can't talk. I can't. And I said, "What is wrong, Emily? What's wrong?" And she said, "I got a mark on my citizenship, and it wasn't me. I wasn't bad, but I have a mark, and I didn't do anything wrong." And then she said, "And you remember when we found that snake in the back of our house, and I was so afraid?" She's like, "This is so much worse."
Oh, bless her
And I just
heart. Oh
lost
my
it.
goodness.
And I tell you, and that was her teacher came up to me and said, "Look, I know she's not at fault. I know it wasn't her." Said she's learning how to take one for the team. Maybe this will be good for her. Well, I don't know how it ended up being good for her, because it just about killed her.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Poor
And that's
baby.
that's just who she is,
That's hard on your body. I mean,
And
to
yeah,
have that intensity, that's really, I mean, we're learning about that. We're learning about, like, when it comes to the trauma and how it affects your
yeah,
body, and it stores in your body and it
yeah.
stores in your subconscious. And so it's hard on your body. I mean, I lived in survival mode for most of my life, probably until about maybe 10 years ago. And my body is paying the price. I am
Oh,
absolutely paying the price for having the years and years and
um,
years of
yeah,
survival mode and taking one for the team and just sucking it
yes.
up buttercup and doing it anyway. I just move on, and I'm paying
No.
the price for it now. And
And
so
see, and so maybe that isn't the best. My mom, who again was a teacher, she disagreed. I talked to her about that at the time, and she said, "See, I disagree with that."
I do
Uh,
too.
she said that Emily didn't learn anything from that, and
You
she
know,
did.
the whole idea, I'm sorry, and I people may not like this, but the whole idea of putting 30 students with 30, maybe 30, 20 different ways of learning, or just 30 different personalities, 30 different ways of learning, 30 different lives, and you put them in one classroom, and everybody has to act one way. They have to learn one way, they have to act one way. And I
Yep,
think it's a broken system.
I do too. I do too. And you're
I learn
exactly
different than you do, and neither one is wrong.
exactly. Kids have different learning styles. They have different behavior styles. And one punishment doesn't necessarily work on everybody. It
No.
just doesn't.
And
So
I'm
yes,
not one to jump into the punishment right away anyway. Have a conversation with the kids. Let them,
yeah,
that's a teaching moment. That was
yes,
a teaching moment for them, where the
I
teacher could
agree.
have handled it a different way. It wasn't black or white. It's not, we have to do
Yeah,
it this way or this way, but just my
I
opinion.
agree. I agree. And now, I mean, I think about this poor kid. She's been through it, and I'm hoping she's kind of. We're trying. The oldest daughter and I are trying to kind of push her towards yoga and
Oh, there you
just
go.
ways to start dealing with a lot of she has a lot of PTSD. She's just ways of
Oh,
dealing with her trauma that and granted,
yeah.
she's gotten into group therapy. Thank goodness. She got with a therapist. The group therapy was great for her because
Good.
they detected, the answers. You're not going to get points for the right answer here. So she got called out for that immediately, because those were the best people to read a people pleaser and to put a people pleaser in her place and say, that's not what we're doing here. We're not here to give the right answer. We're here to help and to listen.
Oh,
So she finally had to really confront her demons and start talking about where she is and why. And so that helped. And that allowed her then to get into therapy that is finally going deeper.
oh,
So
good.
she's finally getting the kind of therapy that she needs. But people ask, how's she doing with her POTS? Some days she's good. Some days she knows what she needs to do. Does she always do it? No. But at least she spends most time. She doesn't have as many issues because she's taking medication and she's doing things that she
She's
should be doing.
managing it.
She's managing it. But it's going to be something that she's going to deal with for the rest of her life, unfortunately. So we
And
were hoping.
hopefully, as she gets healthier with her mental
Yes,
part, going through the therapy, that the physical part will definitely get better. I mean, they're definitely tied.
they absolutely are tied.
I
Yes,
mean, it's kind of silly of us to think that, well, there's the brain and then there's the body and they're two separate things, but they absolutely are connected. And stomach issues and
oh,
mental health are absolutely 100% connected.
intertwined.
Yep.
Yep,
Yep.
completely.
So she'll get better. She'll get better. As she works on her therapy, she's going to get better and she's going to get stronger. And maybe I'll have her on my podcast someday.
I would love that. I hope so.
Yeah.
That would be great if she gets to that point, and that would be wonderful.
Yeah, that would be. So if parents needed to reach out to you, maybe they're in a panic, maybe they're dealing with these issues and they've got questions for you. So how could they reach you?
They can reach me going to my website. You can find, that's where my books are, but I do have, and I'm trying to include all kinds of different things. I've got like a little problem solving thing for girls where they can actually come up with solutions to problems. I gave these out at, I went to a PTA conference, and so I'm developing problem solving packets for girls that I'm going
That's
to actually sell
awesome.
on my website, where they're given a problem with two of the characters, and I have little finger puppet versions of the characters that they can construct, act out different potential solutions. And if they come up with what they think is a good solution, they can submit it to my website. And then if I like it, I will use it on my website and in my socials, because I said I want to
Ooh.
give credit to girls for solving their own problems, because that gives them some
Yes.
autonomy. I'm just, anything that we can do to give girls more confidence and more just
Empower them.
empower them, exactly, to feel good about who they are. So you can find all that. That's on my website, which is
Which
at
is
MyCrummyWorld, and it's spelled Crumby, Crumby World, because they're bread.
ah,
So it's MyCrummy, Crumby world.com. And of course, you can find me if people are interested in a lot of the stuff that I talked about today. I post a lot about it on my socials. So on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok,
LinkedIn.
X, I'm on all of them, Threads, even Pinterest. I put a lot of this. In fact, and I'm going to be running in the next couple of weeks, I'll be doing the signs to detect whether or not your daughter is the mean girl. And there are 4 different steps. I will put all of that on my social.
Nice.
If they are interested, you can find that at MyCrummyWorld. Again, MyCrummyWorld. On all of it's either at MyCrummyWorld or just MyCrummyWorld in a different platform. You can find me. So easy
Oh,
to
I
find.
love that. I love that you're putting these packages together. And I love that you're having the young ladies figure it out.
That's
Instead of us always telling them, let them, this is part of the learning process, is helping them figure this stuff out.
Yes. Yes.
Instead of just telling them what to do.
Yes.
They're smart. They got brains.
They do. And it's so nice, because if they start figuring out how to solve like one problem,
Right.
all of a sudden they start solving more problems. And that not only
Exactly.
helps parents, that helps teachers. Because if teachers don't have to step in and get involved in all the girl drama in classrooms, they have more time to teach. And I tell you, I say this because I think about 5th grade, how much time we spent sitting outside in the courtyard in a circle with all the girls, with our poor male teacher saying, figure it out.
Oh yeah, I bet.
All the drama in the classroom. Figure it out.
Yeah, they want to run from it. The male teacher's like, I want no part of it. Nope. Poor guys. Yeah. I mean,
No,
we don't even want to deal with it, but
I know it. I know
they're
it.
like, I have no idea what to do here. This is way out of my league, way above my pay grade. That's funny. Oh gosh. So I always ask my guests this question. What would you like to leave our listeners with?
One thing, it's never too late. I know you hear my story and you may be at a point where you think, is my daughter too old to really impart any kind of change?
Yeah.
No, 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 no. Never, ever,
True.
ever give up. Never.
True.
And there's a post that I love that I saw and I've reposted it on social that says, don't stop. Don't stop. Even though I turn away from you, don't stop
Mm.
pursuing me. Even though I close the door, don't stop trying to open it. Even though I turn away, don't stop chasing after me.
Oh.
Just keep trying, keep going. And it's hard. It's so hard. I understand that, but don't think it's too late. If you can, of course, get them when they're young, start intervening when they're little and they'll
Mm-hmm.
listen, and it just makes your life that much easier. But even if you have older kids, keep going, keep pursuing, keep trying,
I
keep connecting, keep
I know
connecting.
that to be true because I've seen adults change. I've changed myself. So if adults can change, kids can change. They just need guidance.
They do. And
And
they want it.
they
They
want
want it so
exactly.
desperately. They want it. They really do. I went and saw, and not to plug Disney or Pixar, but I went and saw, I don't know if you've seen it. I went and saw Inside Out 2 with my now
Mm-mm.
grown youngest daughter. And both of us just cried because
Oh.
it deals with anxiety. And that movie is done in such a way. They did a great job because you actually are seeing it through the eyes of a girl experiencing a panic attack. And for me, it was so powerful because I don't know I've never had real problems with anxiety, or I mean, I've had
Mm.
some really anxious moments, but I've never had a full blown panic attack to the extent that she has. And so being able to sit and watch it next to her, I really felt like, wow. I mean, I
It
just turned,
connected you.
both of us, it did. And both
It
of us
did.
just sat and cried. And so I tell parents, it's
Mm.
great going with your adult kids because it hits differently with parents of adult kids versus parents of little kids because
True.
the parents of adult kids have already been through it. You've been there. And boy, and I've talked to so many parents of adult kids who've seen it and they just say, "Oh my gosh, what a great movie and what a great way to really validate a lot of the things that your kids have experienced and have
Mm.
talked to you about, It really does." So, I know that's a shameless plug and it's not but it's such a
No,
good movie.
but that's a really tender moment you had with your daughter, and
Oh,
it was a connection that you wouldn't have probably gotten anywhere else.
yes, and she
Sometimes
chose it.
movies can move us.
It's so true, but I highly, highly recommend it. That's why I say, and not just, I know a lot of parents out there saying, I'm not going to see that movie. I don't have little kids. Don't let that stop you. Go see it.
I watch little kid movies
Right.
and I watch them before I had a child and I watch them, I have an excuse now. I have grandkids, so I can hide behind that. Oh, the grandkids want to watch it. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So,
So
yes.
true. Well, this has been so informative and so helpful and such a great subject that needs more attention. And I know that they've been working on bullying in schools for years, but I feel like it's like you say, it's gotten worse instead of better. And it's that
Yep.
silent bullying that goes on where there's no words exchanged.
Yep.
And
It's
it's
there. It is
devastating.
there. Yes. And
It's a
it is.
look, it's a pss, 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 it's devastating. So keep up the good work. And I even want to, I always put on my website if a guest sells a book or something that they have. What I would like to put on there though is those tests you were mentioning about whether your daughter could be a bully or being
Yes.
bullied
I
and
will
what
send
to look for. I want to put that on my website because I want
absolutely.
parents to be able to access that really quick. Because that's not that can't be very a good feeling to
No,
think, do I have to go take this test? Either way,
I
whether your
know.
daughter's being bullied or the daughter
Yes.
is the bullied,
It's good to know. It's good to, you are
it's
so
good
much
to
better
know.
off knowing what's
Yeah.
going on with your kid, right, wrong, or indifferent. You just need to know.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's the most
And
important thing,
you need to
knowing.
be empowered because again, remember, like you were saying, you're modeling the behavior in front of
Yeah,
them. And even when you make a mistake, it's a great opportunity to fix it right there. Doesn't
yeah,
mean it's over and you can't go back and fix it and you can't have a conversation with your child. I have conversations with my adult son now, so it can be done
yeah.
at any time.
Yes, it can. I
So
agree.
thank you so
Wholeheartedly.
much for what you're
Thank you.
doing. Keep
Thank you.
up the great work.
I will. I will. I mean, it's times like this. It helps because it's a tough it's a tough road.
Yeah.
It is, but I really enjoy it, and I enjoy being able to talk about it. Just
And you are
knowing.
making a difference.
So, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for being here.
Okay. Thanks for having me.